The Leader's Pause. I'm your host, Hal Runkel, and I have a question as always. What is the one leadership skill that was a luxury in the 20th century, but has become an absolute necessity in the 21st century? We'll answer that question and talk all about it when we get started. So stay tuned. You're listening, watching The Leader's Pause with Hal Runkel.
Welcome to the Leader's Pause, where leaders like you tune in to find calm, get clear, and level up. Tune in with best-selling author, speaker, and coach Hal Runkel as he helps you take back your time, your energy, and your decision-making power. All you have to do is learn to press your own pause button first. So, take a break, take a breath, take a knee, and learn to access your greatest human superpower, the ability to pause, think, and decide for yourself. It's time to find calm, get clear, and level up. The Leader's Pause starts now.
Hey folks, this is Hal Runkel. I am coming to you not from my normal studio, but I am on the road in beautiful, amazing Cape Cod. So I am sitting outside. It is, 65 degrees and absolutely gorgeous. And I am excited about today's topic because we're going to try and unpack something that I think has actually become very, very confusing. It is incredibly popular. People talk about this all the time now, but I hear it misused and I hear it confused, and it's time we unpack it. So, what is a skill that every leader that was a luxury for leaders, I think, in the 20th century and before that, but is an absolute necessity for any leader in the 21st century? And that skill is empathy. Hear it all the time. It's talked about all the time. It's written about all the time, podcasted about all the time. And yet, I think you ask people, what is empathy? And you're going to get a ton of different responses. And you're actually going to get some reactions because it's been talked about so much. It is ubiquitous in media, in literature on and self-help stuff. It is everywhere. In leadership stuff, it's talked about and talked about and talked about. In the 20th century, empathy in many ways was derided as a term of weakness. In fact, one of my strongest gurus, the person I follow, who I think got leadership as well as anyone, his name's Rabbi Edwin Friedman. He was a rabbi in the DC area, as well as a very accomplished marriage and family therapist and an incredible consultant to leaders in countries all over the world, very successful author. And he hated empathy, hated talking about it, thought it was weakness, thought it was the one skill that a leader needed to eschew in order to be successful. And I would love to have a conversation with him about it because I think he misunderstood it or understood it differently than we understand it now. And I think he actually practiced it. And what it comes down to is something that I pay so much attention to. You've seen it on this show, but I pay so much attention to the particularity of word choice. So much so that I have often been criticized as someone who exercises too much time in semantics. Now, here's what's interesting about that term. We're not going to go too deep into it, but the semantics term is now used as a term of derision for anyone who's making a bigger deal out of something than it is. Saying you're splitting hairs about two different words and they both mean the same thing. So we're just talking about semantics. So basically you're saying you're using it as a criticism of someone saying you're being irrelevant. You're talking about something that doesn't really matter. Here's the irony is semantics is a term that is very particular and used in a very specific way. So why do we use that term and not irrelevant? We use that term because of the connotations that that term has, the specificity that that term has, the common understanding that that term now has, and that irrelevant is too broad. So the irony of semantics is it matters. Word choice very distinctly matters, especially given that that's actually not what the term means. Semantics originally was a linguistics term that just talks about the connection of meaning between a word and what it's actually referring to. That's the study of semantics. So what are we talking about here? Empathy. How is it different from sympathy? And I think that is incredibly important. Not only me, it's been studied and put out by a lot of people I really, really respect. And I'm bold enough and maybe naive enough to say, and I think they've done it poorly. I think they've actually gotten it wrong. And that's why you had some pushback against empathy in the 20th century. And that's why I think there's a danger of misunderstanding it in the 21st and certainly misapplying it. So what I offer is an understanding of sympathy versus empathy that is different than is out there, but I believe will be helpful. Certainly helpful when I work through this with my coaching clients, with my executive clients that I'm working with, executive leadership teams that I'm working with. Because again, they hear about empathy all the time. But the reality is you can't lead without it in the 21st century. We'll talk about that after we just talk about what does it mean? And how does it get confused with sympathy, and how does that mess everything up? Sympathy, in my understanding, is about sharing. S-Y-M, simpatico, right? We use that term to talk about connection. We use that term to talk about that we are actually in this thing together. And so think about it. When somebody says, I have sympathy for that person, it's got a connotation of that I feel for someone else, that I am sharing a feeling for someone else. Now, oftentimes now, sympathy has carried a negative connotation that is about feeling pity for someone else, which inherently makes you put yourself above somebody else and looking down. But sympathy and also in other circles is this thing, I need to feel what they're feeling. Now, unfortunately, that's a lot of folks, what people think is empathy, including somebody I incredibly respect that I have not met yet, and I can't wait to meet her because we actually went to rival high schools, and I think we went to some of the same parties because we graduated around the same time, at the same time, in Houston, Texas. Her name is Dr. Brene Brown, who is unbelievably famous and incredible. I respect her so much at what she's done to highlight and elevate vulnerability as a critical skill. But she has this video, has this TED Talk, and I believe she gets it dead wrong. She gets the exact opposite. She's saying sympathy is this distance thing and empathy is this connective thing. And I think it's the exact opposite. Not that empathy is distant, but empathy must maintain a distance in order for it to be valuable. Because unlike sympathy, I believe empathy is not about feeling anything. It is about understanding someone else's feelings. Now, you'll see some classic definitions online and in dictionaries that say empathy is about putting yourself in someone else's shoes. Yes, it is, but that doesn't mean you're feeling it. That means you're understanding. It is a cognitive exercise. It is an attempt to understand what someone else is going through. And when we come back from the break, I will highlight for you how valuable this is, why this is so incredibly, like I said, valuable for your leadership today. The ability to put yourself in someone's shoes does not mean that you need to put yourself in a situation where you're feeling what they're feeling. I am so thrilled that when I was working as a therapist and counseling couples who've been through some of the most horrific things, in particular, losing a child, I am so glad that I do not feel what they feel. I am so glad that I've not had to go through that experience in order to feel what they feel. And I'm so glad that I didn't need to feel what they feel in order to be helpful to those people. Glad I didn't know go through domestic violence. I'm glad I haven't had an affair or my wife hasn't had an affair. I'm so glad. But was I able to generate empathy for people in those situations? Good God, I hope so, because I wouldn't be able to have helped them at all. Here's another that I to help empathy, to see empathy as a cognitive exercise, not a feeling with someone, but as an understanding. Empathy is the number one skill for actors. My son is an actor, and he knows that he has got to be able to put himself in the situation of another person without judgment. He's got to be able to do that so that he can understand what that person is thinking, feeling. It's an understanding. Now, if it helps him to begin to try to appreciate and see what that feeling must feel like, that's great. It's still a cognitive exercise. It is not a sharing in that feeling. It is an understanding at a very, very deep level what that person is going through, what their choices are, what their opinions are, what makes them tick. That's empathy. Time for a break. When we come back, I'm going to show how valuable it is and how you can actually start putting it to use in a way that's not dangerous, that's not scary, that's not overly vulnerable, but is incredibly valuable. So stay with me. We'll be right back. This is the Leader's Pause. I'm your host, Hal Runkel, and today we are unpacking the miracle, the magic of a leadership skill that you absolutely have to develop, nurture, get better at, improve at in the 21st century, and that's empathy. Now, in the first segment, what we did was unpack how sympathy is different than empathy and recognize that sympathy is more of a feeling exercise and empathy is more of a cognitive thinking exercise. It is using your imagination to place yourself in someone else's situation to understand how they might be feeling, how they might be thinking, how they might be justifying their actions, what is motivating them, what is leading. You've often heard actors, kind of a joke about actors is, what's my motivation? In order to play this different character, different than me, what's my motivation? What is their motivation is what they're really asking. What drives them? And they've got to be able to play that. You can't play a serial killer if you're in judgment of the serial killer. The only way you play a serial killer is if you get into their mind and cognitively imagine how they might tick. What makes them do this? Why would they do that? Here's why that's so incredibly powerful. Even if you're not an actor, it helps you understand what's going on in the people you're trying to lead. It helps you understand what's going on with a customer you're trying to serve. It helps you understand rather than automatically trying to tell them what you are going through. Rather than to force upon them or foist upon them what you think they should feel. Empathy is the act of trying to understand what they feel, trying to understand what they think. So, for instance, you're in a sales call, you start talking about the benefits of here's why they should buy this product. You have already gotten off on 5 wrong feet. If you start off instead asking questions about, well, how long have you been in the market for this? What would this do for you? When did you start thinking this is the kind of product that you really need? What have you tried so far to solve this problem? What is the pain that you're going through? Using questions because what you need is information from them so that you can even better imagine what they might be going through. And here is when you're playing in the major leagues with empathy, is when you can begin to accurately guess before they articulate it what they may be thinking and feeling, what may be driving them. And it's amazing when you can say, well, I'm guessing, tell me if I'm wrong. that you're really wondering how long you guys can sustain this way of operating without a all-encompassing accounting software. I'm guessing, working with the CEO yesterday, tell me if I'm wrong, but how much are you wondering if you really want this job? That's a bold statement, but guess what? I was dead right. She has been wondering that. And that's been driving her. She's been afraid to articulate it with anybody. But my ability to empathize, to guess, imagine what she might be going through, that is connection. How much does she trust me now that it seems like I can read her mind? Well, I'm not reading her mind. It's based on incredible amounts of experience, talking to lots of people, but also lots and lots of questions to kind of get to know her. So that, and then I can take what I believe is an experienced, educated guess. Now, sometimes I'm wrong. Well, I'm guessing what you might be thinking is this. No, oh no, that's not what I'm thinking. I'm thinking this and this and this. Fantastic. Guess what? They just gave you all the information you didn't have. Now, one of the best explanations of this and applications of this comes from a guy named Chris Voss. And a lot of you have heard of this book. I hope you have read it. And if you have, read it again. This is absolutely one of my favorite books, period. Regardless of genre. It's called Never Split the Difference. And I'm not the only one. Lots of people say this. It's incredibly popular. But he employs what he calls tactical empathy. And in case you think that has anything to do with weakness or touchy-feely stuff, this guy was the leading hostage negotiator for the FBI for years and years and years. This guy would be flown into the Philippines to negotiate somebody that got taken hostage and try and get him out. And he was able to usually get that person freed with very, very minimal cost to the family or the company that is trying to get the person back. Tough guy. That's why he called it tactical empathy. It is, I've got to get into the head of this person without judging them so that I can understand what might lead them to a solution we're wanting to get. That can't happen without incredible imagination, cognition. If you're feeling it, if you think my job is to feel it with them, you're off on the wrong foot in another direction because you're not going to. Thank God. Again, like I explained in the first segment, I'm so glad I didn't have to feel what it's like to lose a child in order to help couples that have gone through that horror. I'm so glad. And so many times when we feel something too deeply, our cognition actually erodes. Our ability to truly understand and articulate what may be going on gets flooded with the same emotions that person is flooded with. That's why we have to maintain a certain amount of distance through cognitively imagining it rather than feeling it so that I'm not as flooded as they are. I want to understand. I want to guess. I want to help create a situation where they are better at articulating all that's going on that's making them tick so that I can better tailor whatever I'm trying to serve, offer, sell to exactly what they need. That's the power of empathy. And why it's so important in the 21st century is because we are now more aware of mental health and fitness and struggles than ever before. Ever before. And I will say thank God, because all that stuff's been under the surface forever, because we're human beings. Now we're able to talk about it a lot more in a more educated way. But when you're throwing around terms and not even able to define them the same way, then it gets dangerous. But learning to be empathetic with people is not learning to feel for them, to feel with them. Learning to be empathetic with people is learning to cognitively imagine what they might be going through so that you can better guess, understand, again, imagine what makes them tick, what might be driving them, what might lead them to do what they're going to do next. What might they actually want? And here's the magic: when you're really good at empathy, then you can actually get to a place where you can anticipate and articulate what it is they want better than they can. Maybe they're not even aware of it. You want to know who the best, probably of all time, of that in the business world is? Steve Jobs. My job is to tell them, help them see what it is they want before they even know that they want it. 1,000 songs in your pocket, a tablet to carry around with the power of the internet at your fingertips. These products that are now ubiquitous and have changed our lives forever, they were based on the imagination of what might people in their everyday lives want more of, want to do better. Every entrepreneur does this really, really well. They may not have ever called it empathy, but they are now. And now you can as well, understanding it is not about feeling, it's about understanding, imagining what it is someone else might be going through so that you can better serve them. And that's what leadership is: serving people in a way that actually engenders more and more trust so that they follow us and eventually surpass us. This has been the Leader's Pause. I'm your host, Hal Runkel. Join me in a couple of weeks, and I can't wait to see you then. Until then, stay calm. See you.
You have been listening to The Leader's Pause with Hal Runkel, the show that helps leaders like you find calm, get clear, and level up. Tune in every first and third Thursday at 3 p.m. Pacific, 6 p.m. Eastern on Transformation Talk Radio to access your greatest superpower, the ability to pause, think, and decide for yourself. Book a conversation with Hal today. Visit halrunkel.com.